This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn how to play Axis and Allies, D-Day. Since 1981, there's been several Axis and Allies games. The Axis and Allies games fall into three neat categories based on the scale of the game and the length of the game. Classic Axis and Allies and many of its other variants all are played on the world stage, and these games takes about 5 hours at the minimum to play. Theater level games only cover either the Europe or Pacific theater, and they take about 4 to 5 hours to play. Campaign level games focus on one large battle or campaign, and they usually can be finished in about 2 to 3 hours. The only other Axis and Allies game that can be played in this short length of time is Axis and Allies 1941, which is a stripped down version of the world game. Axis and Allies 1941 was designed as the series' gateway game. However, in my opinion, the best Axis and Allies gateway game is D-Day. I first played Axis and Allies back in 1984 with the Milton Bradley Game Master series. I got the game as a Christmas present. I was like 10 or 11 at the time, and it was really the deep end of the pool. The complexity quickly alienated all my relatives, and my parents vowed never to buy a game like that again for me. I, on the other hand, loved the game, and I played it all through junior high and high school. Back then, we didn't have all these other options like they do now. We just had the classic Axis and Allies game, and it was damn hard to find people to play with. Basically, you sought out the brainy kids who were playing Risk, and then you just press ganged them into playing Axis and Allies with you for like 10 or 12 hours. Obviously, with that kind of time commitment and complexity, you didn't get a lot of people who wanted to re-enlist next weekend for the next game. Many years later, it's the 21st century, and we have gateway games to help bridge people into the series. Axis and Allies D-Day is the perfect game for this. The mechanics are much simpler, it's a tactical level game, there are cards that tell you what to do, and best of all, it gives you an opportunity to give new players a good experience with the game. If they enjoy themselves, they can build their way up to a theater level game and then to a full world game if they like. If you really love Axis and Allies, and war games in particular, then you really want to take an effort to introduce new players to these games. And Axis and Allies D-Day is the perfect place to start. So let's get going. This is the contents of the Axis and Allies D-Day game. You can see there's units and cards and boards. Nothing too overwhelming for new players. D-Day occurred in 1944 at the tipping point in the war. At this point in the war, the Germans know the Allies are going to invade Europe. They just don't know where. There are 3 viable invasion points: Cherbourg, Normandy, and Pas-de-Calais. The Allies initiate Operation Fortitude, which is a huge deception campaign. A phantom army of plywood trucks, inflatable tanks, and cardboard soldiers, led by General Patton. The Germans totally buy this ruse and reinforce at Pas-de-Calais, expecting the invasion there. With the Germans distracted by the Phantom Army, the Allies strike Normandy, and that's where our game begins. Get your bits together, people. It's time to set up the game. Axis and Allies supports 3 players. One player always plays Germany, and a second player can play the Allies. If you have 3 players, then 2 players can play the Allies, 1 can play the US, and 1 can play the UK. While it's difficult to tell from looking at the game board, historically the Canadians were also involved in the D-Day invasion. Their forces are lumped in with the British National Army. As a variant setup, this is the perfect place for Player 3.5. Player 3.5 is the ideal position for a little brother, a little sister, a girlfriend, someone who's somewhat intimidated by the rules but wants to play as well. This new player can play cooperatively with the UK and kind of ride shotgun throughout the game and get familiar with how the game plays on a very limited scope. Remember, it's all about getting new players in this genre. To win Axis and Allies D-Day as the Allies, you need to capture the 3 victory cities of Cherbourg, Saarloup, and Caen. To win as Axis Germany, you must keep the Allies from conquering the 3 victory cities until turn 10. Step 1, you're going to place the game board. Step 2, looking at all the silhouettes on the map, you're going to set up the US and UK units. Likewise, by looking at the silhouettes, you're going to set up the Axis units on the board. Step 4, you're going to place the order cards on the board. There are 3 types of D-Day cards. There are the order cards, the fortune cards, and the tactic cards. The order cards tell you what size units get to take action and what to do. During each order, there's also a fortune card that if you roll a dice and score a 1 or a 6, a certain event happens. A 1 would be a good fortune event, and a 6 would be a bad fortune event. Finally, there are tactic cards, which are like special ability cards that you can play once during the game. For a basic game, you use only the order cards until you get familiar with the game. Then after that, you can add the fortune and tactic cards. You place them how you see here. Each order has 1 of each card type, and then they're all stacked together. So you're going to work your way through the deck from order 1 to order 16. Step 5, you're going to place the turn marker on the first turn, and this is what you'll use to track the turns in the game. Finally, in step 6, put the reinforcement boards on the table, and you're going to place a plastic unit on each of the symbols indicated on the board. Next, we're going to go through a full turns play sequence, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Once again, here's a quick reminder of the objectives. The Axis must hold off the Allies for 10 turns. The Allies must conquer the 3 victory cities. At this point, we've set up the board, we've got our cards put together, and we're ready to start the game. Flip over the first order card and start the battle. We start with an airborne assault. Paratroopers land in each of these highlighted zones and attack. Roll a 6-sided dice for each paratrooper, and if you roll a 1, you hit on the units in those zones. For every hit, the paratroopers remove 1 enemy units, except for blockhouses. The fortune card for order number 1, roll the 6-sided dice. If you roll 1 and get good fortune, then it's a complete surprise, and you can attack on a 2 rather than a 1 with your paratroopers. If you roll a 6, the operation is a complete disaster. 2 of the paratroopers die, and the Axis player gets to choose which 2, and your people are so disarrayed they can't attack this turn. If the Allies choose to play their tactics card during order number 1, then they roll a dice, and on a roll of 3 or less, they get that many extra paratrooper reinforcements. These paratroopers are the next infantry units on the reinforcement card. They land and attack just like the first group of paratroopers. Order number 2 is an Ally naval bombardment. There are 6 battleships offshore bombarding the coastline. Roll 1 dice for each battleship. If you roll a 2 or less, remove your choice of blockhouse from the shoreline. Order 2's fortune card. If you roll a 1 and get good fortune, you have improved targeting with your battleships and can hit on a 3 or less. If you roll a 6, however, there's heavy fog and pitching seas, and you can only hit on a 1 during this turn. Order number 2's tactics card is an Axis card, which is a V2 rocket strike. So if you roll a 4 or less, you get to remove 1 unit from the reinforcement chart of the Allies. Order card number 3, the Allies will launch their fighter patrols. Fighters are used as blocking units in D-Day. Basically, you're going to select a zone, and any Axis troops coming in or going out of that zone can be attacked. For this order, though, you're just setting up your patrols. For order number 3, if you roll a 1, there are no restrictions on the number of fighters that are patrolling in a zone. If you roll a bad fortune, a 6, then there's airfield unreadiness. You roll a dice for each fighter, and if you roll a 4 or higher, that plane cannot patrol this turn. Order number 3's Tactics card is an Allies card. You choose one fighter, and it is immune to anti-aircraft fire for the entire phase. Order number 4, Anti-aircraft fires at fighters. So any of your planes that are patrolling in an Axis zone with an anti-aircraft gun, the Axis can take a shot at you, and if they roll a 1, they score a hit. For the Order 4 Fortune card, if the Axis player rolls a 1, there are low-flying fighters, and they can hit on a 2 or less. However, if they roll a 6, the Allies get to pick one zone with a fighter and an anti-aircraft gun, and that zone cannot fire on the plane. Order number 4's Tactics card is just a little too theatrical for its own good. If the Axis player's anti-aircraft gun scores a hit on an Allied plane, it catches on fire and crashes into an Allied unit on the beach. The Axis player gets to choose which Allied unit the plane crashes into. In Order number 5, the Allies get to launch a bomber strike. The Allied players need to choose zones that do not have Allied units in them to strike. When the bomber enters a zone, you can roll 1 dice per bomber, and a roll of 3 or less is a hit on whichever unit is there. For Order 5's Fortune card, if you roll a 1, it's a target of opportunity, and your bombers can hit on a 5 or less. However, if you roll a 6, there's airfield unreadiness, so you roll a dice for each bomber, and if you roll a 4 or higher, the bomber cannot take off this turn and bomb. If the Allies play the Order 5 Tactics card, then it's Heavy Bombardment. You roll 1 additional dice for each bomber, and a roll of 3 or less is a hit. Order number 6 is an Axis card, and it's similar to the Fighter card. It's the anti-aircraft phase for the bombers. So if your bombers are in a zone with anti-aircraft guns, they get to fire, and a roll of 1, they hit and destroy your bomber. Order number 6's Fortune card. If the Axis rolls a 1, there is low-flying bombers, and the anti-aircraft guns can hit on a 2 or less. If the Axis rolls a 6, there's an anti-aircraft shell shortage. The Allies choose the zone, and in that zone, the anti-aircraft guns cannot fire because they don't have enough shells. Order number 6's Tactics card is an Axis card. So you choose one zone in which a bomber missed any target during the phase. Then you choose one Allies land unit in an adjacent zone and remove it from the game. So basically the bombs overshot the target and hit its own people. Order number 7, the bombers return to the airfield. For Order number 7's Fortune card, if you roll a 1, there's airfield construction. If you've lost any bombers, you get to return 1 to the field. If you roll a 6, however, your bomber is the victim of a Luftwaffe attack, and the Axis player chooses and removes 1 striking bomber from play. Order number 7's Tactics card is an Axis card. You choose a coastal zone that contains the Allies' land units, and no Allies' land units can move into that zone during this phase. Order number 8, the Allies move. You get to move land units to adjacent zones, but do not move any land units in beachhead boxes yet. Order number 8's Fortune card, if you roll a 1, there are clear roads, and your troops can move 2 zones. If you roll a 6, then you are bogged down, and you can only move 1 for the US and 1 for the UK. Order number 8's Tactics card is for blockhouse construction. You can place 1 blockhouse on any unoccupied blockhouse silhouette, whose zone contains at least 1 Axis unit. Order number 9, blockhouses fire to the sea. The blockhouses fire on the arrow connected to their zone. If they roll less than a 3, there's a hit, and they remove 1 of the units from the beachhead box. Order number 9's Fortune card, if you roll a 1, there's Hedgehog Disruption, and blockhouses can now hit on a 5 or less. If you roll a 6, there's Ammunition Failure, and blockhouses can only hit on a 1 in this phase. Order number 9's Tactic cards is a deceptive landing arrangement for the Allies. The Allies can rearrange any or all of the land units in their beachhead boxes, as long as the US stays in the US boxes and the UK stays in the UK boxes. Order number 10, move units from beachhead boxes to adjacent zones. Order number 10's fortune card, on a roll of 1, there's a coordinated landing, and US and UK units can move one adjacent zone from their normal landing area. For example, an Omaha Beach unit could move to Gold Beach, and vice versa. Order number 10's tactic card is a combined assault, so during the next phase, for each artillery unit in a zone, a corresponding Allied infantry in that zone attacks on a 2. Order number 11, Allies attack and Axis defends, so conduct one cycle of combat in each zone having both Allies and Axis land units. Order number 11's fortune card, if you roll a 1, you have coordinated infantry, and your Allied infantry units hit on a 2 rather than a 1 in this phase. On a roll of 6, it's uncoordinated attacks, so during this phase, US land units can only attack in one zone, and UK land units can only attack in one zone. Order number 11's tactic card is long-range howitzers, so roll 1 dice per Allied artillery unit and target an Axis land unit in adjacent zone. If you roll a 2 or less, it's a hit, and the targeted unit does not counterattack. Okay, we're going to pause here a moment at Order 11, because Order 11 is the first order where combat gets complicated. Up until that point, it's told you exactly what to do on the card. So let's run through a brief battle example to show you how this works. In this tutorial scenario, the British National Army has seized control of Victory City of Caen. However, a German reinforcement force is storming in to try to retake the city, so let's play out this scenario. In step 1, you're going to get out the battle board. You're going to place the German units on the attacker side and the British National Army on the defender side. In step 2, the attacking units are going to fire first. The attacker gets to roll a dice for each unit. For the infantry, he needs to roll a 1. Unfortunately, he rolled a 4, a 2, and a 5, so he missed with all 3 infantry. Next, he rolls for the artillery piece. He needs to get a 2, and he does roll a 2, so he scores a hit. Finally, he rolls a dice for each panzer tank. He needs to roll a 1, a 2, or a 3. He ends up rolling a 2, which is a hit, another 2, which is a hit, and a 5, which is a miss. Now, the attacker has scored 3 hits, but the defender gets to choose which of the 3 units he will move to the casualty zone. The defender chooses 2 infantry units and an artillery piece to move to the casualty zone. Now the defender gets to fire back. The defender gets to fire back with all his units, including the ones recently moved to the casualty zone. Tanks, artillery, and infantry all defend on a 2, so he needs to roll a 1 or a 2 to score a hit. The defender rolls a dice for each unit. He gets a 1, which is a hit, a 2, which is a hit, 2 3s, a 4, and 2 5s, all of which miss. The attacker gets to select which units he's going to remove to the casualty zone. The attacker moves 2 infantrymen to the casualty zone. Now that each side is fired, you're going to remove all the casualties from the battle board. Next, you're going to determine control, and since both sides still have units, the battle is not completed. This is the end of the turn. So now you're going to return the survivors to the main board, and you'll continue this battle when you come through it again with the order cards. Axis and Allies D-Day is one huge battle, so you may need to make several passes through the cards to resolve the conflict. Order number 12, the Axis moves. So fighters will strafe any Axis land units moving in or out of zones they patrol. Roll 1 die for each fighter per unit that moves. A roll of 1 is a hit. Order number 12's fortune card, on a roll of 1, there are clear roads, and the Axis land units can move 2 zones. On a roll of 6, there are fuel shortages and sabotage, and Axis land units can only move out of only 2 zones in this phase. Order number 12's tactics card is a French resistance strike. Roll 1 dice for each victory city, and on a roll of 2 or less, remove 1 Axis land unit of the Allies' choice. Order number 13, Axis attacks, Allies defend. So conduct 1 cycle of combat in each zone having both Axis and Allies land unit. Fortune card number 13, the Axis attacks and the Allies defend. Roll 1 dice. On a roll of 1, coordinated infantry, Axis infantry hit on a 2 in this phase. On a roll of 6, uncoordinated attacks, Axis land units can attack in only 2 zones in this phase. Order number 13's Tactics card, long range 88s, roll 1 dice per Axis artillery against a target Allies land unit in an adjacent zone. A roll of 2 or less is a hit. The targeted unit does not get to counterattack. Order number 14, Allies reinforcement. So you're going to roll 2 dice for the United Kingdom and 2 dice for the United States. Reinforcements are pretty simple. Basically, you're going to roll 2 dice and you're going to move that many of the reinforcements to the beachhead boxes you see highlighted on the board. The reinforcement chart shows you where to put the units when you take them off the board. The UK reinforcement chart uses the same methodology. You're going to roll the 2 dice and you're going to take that many units off the board and place them where the board tells you. Just remember, US troops go in US beachhead boxes and UK troops go in UK beachhead boxes. You can't mix them. Order number 14's Fortune card. Roll 1 dice on a roll of 1. There's a sustained assault, so each of the United Kingdom and the United States may re-roll 1 dice for reinforcements. On a roll of 6, there's sea turbulence, and the UK and the US only get half of their reinforcements. Order number 14's Tactics card, Reconnaissance Strafing. Move any number of fighters to a zone containing a German reinforcement marker. Order number 15 is Axis Reinforcement. So basically you're going to roll 4 dice for the Axis to reinforce their troops. Axis reinforcements appear at the bottom of the board in the areas I've highlighted here. The German reinforcement chart is split in half, so you're going to roll 2 dice for any troops that appear at Rennes and Chartres, and roll 2 dice for any troops that appear in Rouen and Chartres. Order number 15's Fortune card, on a roll of 1 you push to the front, and the Axis may reroll 1 dice per sector for reinforcements in this phase. On a roll of 6, there are sabotage bridges and train tracks, so the Axis only gets half of its rolled reinforcements per sector in this phase. Order number 15's Tactic card, German Convoy. Choose an Axis land unit, and they can move to any zone as long as it's connected with other Axis units in those zones. Order number 16, Fighters return to the airfield. Order number 16 Fortune card, Fighters return. In a roll of 1, there's airfield construction, and if you've lost any fighters, you get to return 1 lost fighter to the airfield. On a roll of 6, there's a Luftwaffe attack, and the Axis player chooses and removes 1 patrolling fighter from play. Order number 16's Tactic card, Volunteers from the home front. Roll 1 dice for each victory city under Allied control. Return that many destroyed UK infantry to the United Kingdom reinforcement chart. And those are the 16 orders you need to play Axis and Allies D-Day. Phew! Once you finish Order 16, you're going to flip back to Order 2, since Order 1 you only use once in the game, and you're going to cycle through them again. You will continue to work through the order cards until you get to turn 10, or the Allies capture the 3 victory cities. Once you get familiar with the cards, you can move through this game fairly quickly. There's little downtime because there's always something going on, so it's easy to keep the players engaged. And that is what makes Axis and Allies D-Day such a great game for new players. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Catch you later.